What if the version of your favorite sci-fi classic was not the real one? Imagine discovering entire scenes erased from the American release scenes filled with madness, rebellion, and cosmic dread. Across Europe, Japan and the Soviet bloc editors created their own cuts, turning familiar stories into surreal nightmares. Tonight, we unlock 10 international sci-fi cuts far wilder than anything Hollywood dared to show. Number 10. Solaris, 1972. Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris was meant to be the Soviet answer to 2001: A Space Odyssey. In the West, the trimmed version played like a dreamlike puzzle of grief and memory. But in Russia, the uncut version ran nearly 3 hours, showing extended philosophical dialogues about guilt and redemption. Soviet censors found it slow, yet they left it untouched, fearing Tarkovsky's intellectual following. When the film reached America, distributors panicked. They cut almost 40 minutes, replacing Tarkovsky's haunting pacing with a more digestible rhythm. Gone were the long corridor sequences, the hypnotic driving scene through Tokyo, and entire philosophical monologues about the human soul. The United States version became an art film about space, while Tarkovsky's original was about faith and forgiveness. Critics in Europe described it as a transcendental experience, while American viewers found it cold and confusing. For decades, the full cut was whispered about by collectors and film schools until Criterion restored it in the early 2000s. Today, that original version feels like a living ghost of cinema's ambition, a slow orbit around the deepest fears of human isolation. It proves that censorship does not always silence art. It only makes it echo longer in memory. Number 9. The Abyss, 1989. James Cameron's underwater epic, The Abyss, was a technical triumph and a financial gamble. The United States theatrical cut felt incomplete, focusing on spectacle rather than message. But the international special edition that circulated through Europe revealed Cameron's true intention, a cautionary tale about humanity's violence and the threat of extinction. The restored footage added nearly half an hour of new material, including a massive underwater tidal wave sequence created by alien forces. American studios insisted on cutting it, fearing audiences would reject the film's overt anti-war message during the Cold War's final years. The United States version ended with personal redemption, while the European version ended with global judgment. Critics overseas called it prophetic. They saw in it a vision of planetary reckoning as oceans rose and nations trembled. The cast endured real danger during filming, spending hours submerged in an unfinished nuclear power plant tank. Ed Harris nearly drowned. Crew members got hypothermia. When Cameron's full version finally reached American audiences on home video, it changed perception overnight. What was once a bloated disaster became a misunderstood masterpiece. Today, The Abyss stands as proof that truth sometimes surfaces only after the studio tide pulls back. Number 8. Brazil, 1985. Terry Gilliam's Brazil might be the most infamous case of dueling cuts in sci-fi history. The United States studio wanted a happy ending. Gilliam wanted chaos. In America, executives at Universal hacked the film apart into a version nicknamed the Love Conquers All cut. It stripped away Gilliam's grim finale, turning tragedy into triumph. But in Europe, the director's cut premiered in full nightmarish glory, a bureaucratic dystopia, where dreams are crushed under paperwork and freedom is just another illusion. The difference between the two cuts changed the meaning of the entire story. In Gilliam's version, the hero's rebellion is crushed, and he descends into madness, imagining escape that never happens. Universal refused to release it until critics and fans revolted. Gilliam secretly screened his version for journalists and fought a public war in newspapers. Eventually, the European cut won. It became a symbol of artistic defiance. The battle over Brazil still defines director versus studio warfare. Watching both cuts today feels like reading two parallel universes, one safe and commercial, the other dark and prophetic. In the end, Brazil predicted not just the future of surveillance, but the endless struggle between imagination and control. Number 7. Blade Runner, 1982. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner is legendary not just for its neon-drenched visuals, but for its many versions, each with a different soul. When the film was first screened in America, the studio demanded a narration and a happy ending. They feared audiences would find it too dark, too slow, too confusing. The result was a film that looked like a masterpiece but felt strangely tamed. But the international version, the one released across Japan and much of Europe, was grittier, bloodier, and more violent. It included extended fight scenes, longer shots of decaying Los Angeles, and extra moments that deepened Deckard's sense of moral rot. Where the American cut tried to comfort the audience, the international cut left them disturbed. The violence was not hidden, it was mournful, poetic, and brutal. Scott's original vision was later resurrected in the director's cut, and then the final cut decades later. Yet the international release remains its own legend, the version that never apologized for its darkness. In Japan, the longer cut was treated almost like forbidden art whispered about in late-night screenings and bootlegged VHS tapes. The controversy defined how studios viewed creative control in the 80s. Blade Runner's shifting versions became a mirror for its own story about identity and memory. Today, it stands as a cinematic puzzle where every cut tells the truth from a different reality. The international version reminds us that sometimes perfection is born in imperfection, that beauty often hides in the edits we are not supposed to see. Number 6. Metropolis, 1927. Fritz Lang's Metropolis was the most ambitious sci-fi film ever made in the silent era. It was also one of the most mutilated. When it premiered in Berlin, the full version ran nearly 2.5 hours, a sweeping story of class warfare, love, and machines. American distributors thought it was too political, too foreign, too long. They cut nearly half the footage and rewrote the story into something simpler. In Europe, however, various alternate cuts began to circulate. French and Argentinian versions with scenes that vanished elsewhere. These included vital sequences of the underground worker city and the monk-like scientist Rotwang's visions of destruction. The United States version turned it into a fairy tale. The European ones preserved the nightmare. For decades, the missing footage was considered lost until in 2008, a nearly complete 30-minute reel was discovered in Buenos Aires. It restored Metropolis to something closer to Lang's original fever dream. The difference was staggering. The characters suddenly had depth, the story, moral weight, the visuals new meaning. The rediscovery of Metropolis full cut changed film history. What was once a fractured fable became a prophetic warning about automation class and faith. Its restored form plays like a message from the past, still echoing into the digital age. The wildest cut of Metropolis was not censored. It was reborn. Number 5. Stalker, 1979. Andrei Tarkovsky returned to the realm of human longing and metaphysical fear with Stalker. The official Soviet release already felt hypnotic, but few outside Russia knew there existed an earlier version that was entirely reshot after the original footage was destroyed due to a film stock error. That first version, according to crew testimony, was even more surreal, more political, and more despairing. In the Soviet Union, the authorities feared its allegories. Tarkovsky used the mysterious zone as a metaphor for forbidden truth and the decay of belief. Rumors spread that the first version showed stronger references to Soviet industrial collapse and spiritual ruin. The government intervened, forcing a year-long reshoot. Tarkovsky refused to abandon his vision, but was forced to rebuild it from fragments. Outside the USSR, especially in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, longer festival prints circulated that featured alternate edits, extended shots of the wilderness, and altered sound design that heightened the sense of unease. These versions played like dreams, half remembered by those who saw them. Years later, film scholars compared notes, trying to piece together the lost version. They found it changed, not just the pacing, but the meaning of faith itself. The surviving film became a monument to endurance to creation, born from catastrophe. Watching Stalker today is like walking through ruins, where the ghosts of two versions haunt every frame. Its wildest cut may be lost forever, but its shadow remains the most haunting of all. Number 4. The Thing, 1982. John Carpenter's The Thing terrified audiences with its paranoia and grotesque practical effects, but most Americans never saw the version that left European viewers speechless. The United States cut trimmed several moments of gruesome transformation and psychological tension in favor of faster pacing. But in Italy, Germany, and Japan, the film played in a slightly longer version that exposed the full madness of isolation. Those international prints included alternate reaction shots, longer dissolves, and additional sound effects that heightened the dread. In one extended scene, the camera lingered on the alien corpse for several extra seconds, turning curiosity into nausea. Another subtle difference involved the final exchange between Macready and Childs. In some prints, Carpenter allowed the silence to last longer before the final explosion of music. American critics dismissed the movie as nihilistic, while European audiences embraced it as art horror. Carpenter's vision of trust and identity collapsed in snowbound despair, but it was the full European version that captured his intent, the slow freeze of the human spirit. The studio never officially acknowledged the alternate cut. It circulated only on foreign reels and rare television broadcasts. Fans spent decades trading bootlegs, trying to decode the missing pieces. When restored prints surfaced years later, audiences realized what had been lost. The Thing was not just a monster movie, it was a study of fear as infection spreading unseen until nothing human was left. The Wilder cut made that truth impossible to ignore. Number 3. Akira, 1988. Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira redefined animation and science fiction forever. Yet most Western audiences never saw it in its purest form. The Japanese theatrical cut was a dense operatic explosion of psychic warfare and post-nuclear collapse running over 2 hours. The United States release shortened sequences, rearranged sound effects, and replaced the haunting Japanese dialogue with a stilted English dub that stripped away nuance. The original version contained cultural and political layers erased in translation. References to post-war guilt and youth rebellion were softened or replaced entirely. The sound design, too, was radically altered. The Japanese cut's drumming ritual score by Geino Yamashirogumi created a primal rhythm of chaos. The American version buried it under more familiar synth tones. Even stranger were the rare European 35mm prints distributed in France and Spain, featuring subtitles but preserving Otomo's full soundscape. Those prints became the holy grail of anime purists. When Akira was finally remastered in high definition, decades later, fans discovered the wildness of the original edit. The pacing slower, the silence heavier, the apocalypse more emotional. What once looked like chaos became a meditation on control, youth, and evolution. The story of Akira's lost edits mirrors its themes perfectly. Power misunderstood, vision diluted, truth censored by fear of confusion. Watching the uncut version today is like touching electricity. It hums with prophetic energy, still warning us about the cost of creation. Number 2. Alien, 1979. Ridley Scott's Alien terrified audiences in America with its slow build and sudden violence. But few realize the European theatrical cut was both longer and darker. In the United States, Fox trimmed scenes to quicken the pace, fearing audiences would lose patience. In Europe, the cuts stayed, and they transformed the experience into something more primal. One such moment occurs after the chestburster scene. The camera in the European print lingers over the stunned crew. The silence is unbearable. Another sequence shows Ripley's journey through the corridors, longer, colder, filled with sound of dripping water and metal groans. It was not just horror, it was loneliness. British censors also released a slightly more explicit version of Brett's death scene, showing the alien descending from chains and shadow before the cut to black. That single shot changed everything. It revealed the creature as part of the ship itself, not just a passenger. The European cut was considered too bleak for American audiences of the late 70s still recovering from Star Wars optimism. Yet this bleaker vision turned Alien into the true nightmare it was meant to be. Critics abroad called it a Gothic poem about survival in the void. Years later, Ridley Scott's director's cut attempted to bridge the difference, but the international version still feels rawer, more authentic. It proved that horror is not about monsters. It is about silence and space and the fragile heartbeat of humanity echoing through metal corridors. Number 1, 2001. A Space Odyssey, 1968. Stanley Kubrick's 2001. A Space Odyssey changed cinema forever, but most audiences have only seen the American studio-approved version. What they never knew was that the original international roadshow cut shown briefly in Europe and Asia was even more mysterious, more poetic, and far stranger than the one that entered history. Kubrick's first version ran nearly 20 minutes longer, featuring extra shots of the Dawn of Man sequence and extended transitions between the film's silent cosmic passages. In these moments, Kubrick experimented with color density lens flares and abstract movement that created a hypnotic trance effect. The American studio panicked after initial screenings, calling it too slow, too confusing, too alienating. Kubrick reluctantly removed those scenes himself, though later confessed the deletions haunted him. In Europe, the longer version played in select theaters for months before vanishing when Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer standardized prints worldwide. But whispers of the lost reels spread among archivists. Some claimed they saw glimpses of it in Munich, others in Paris, where projectionists kept copies against the studio's order. The longer version reportedly gave Hal's shutdown scene more silence, more agony, and more humanity. When fragments resurfaced decades later in a Kansas salt mine, the myth became truth. The footage was real, but restoration remains unfinished. Even now, only a handful of frames have been seen publicly. That international cut represents Kubrick's full descent into the infinite, cinema as symphony, not story. It reminds us that vision often collides with fear, and that sometimes the strangest version is the truest one. From Solaris to 2001, these alternate cuts reveal a secret history of science fiction, where editors, censors, and directors waged war over truth itself. Every missing scene, every lost reel, tells us something about the era's paranoia and courage. Which version do you think defines the truth? Like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of hidden cinema.